Hi friends, it's Marie at LivingFelt, and in today's tutorial, we are going to needle felt a picture of a little fall landscape. This little barn scene is so cute and easy to do. You're going to learn how to build your base image, how to fill out all of this foliage with lots of layers and blends that you make yourself, and how to create this sweet little rustic barn with a little bit of fall harvest in the foreground. We do have a kit for this project, and it's going to include the wool felt, the imagery, and the same wool colors that you see me working with. So if you want to grab that, go ahead, use the supply link down below, or you can grab the PDF and shop the supplies a la carte on the episode page. The supplies for this project are super simple. If you get our kit, you're going to get this collection of colors or one very similar so that you can use the solids and create blends. You'll need a needle felting mat. You can use something as small as a 5x5. I'm working on our WOW mat, and 100% wool felt. The only felting needle I used is a 42 triangle. You'll need a way to get your image onto the background, so you can use a pencil or an iron-on transfer pen. And to do your blends, a couple of hands are helpful, or you can also use these mini hand carders. If you're not using the iron-on transfer pen and you use the pencil cut-out trace method like me, then you'll also need a pair of scissors for paper. To begin our project, I find it really helpful to get all of the major lines onto the fabric or background that you're needle felting on. Pencil works fantastic on our wool felt. I cut out the major design square and traced that onto the felt. And then I cut out the sky, the tree to the left, the roof and side barn as one unit, and then the face of the barn as the final shape. I do like to cut open the hayloft and the barn doors so that I get those angles right. For me, it's a challenge to get those angles correct, so if it helps you, cut those open too. Use these shapes to get your major pencil lines onto your fabric. For the majority of this project, I am working with blends. The fiber we've included with our kit is all our MC1 except for the green. So let us demonstrate a typical blend is just a 1-to-1 ratio. So grab about a quarter size of two colors, in this case, honeysuckle and mandarin, and blend them together just by layer, stack, pull, layer, stack, pull, layer, stack, pull. We don't want the blend to be over blended because we want the highlights, the lowlights, and the in-betweens to use in our beautiful little fall scene. You can blend by hand as I'm demonstrating here, but you can also use our mini hand carders. We have a mini and the micro. Both will work for this project because we're making very small blends. So if you have those, feel free to use them. The reason we start with 1-to-1 ratio blends is it gives you a nice middle ground, and then you can take that and add a little more of the light values for a lighter version and a little bit of the dark values for a darker version. So the 1-to-1 is always a starting point. There are a couple of blends that are uneven, and there are some times where we're blending a color with a blend. So an example of an uneven blend is number 7. It's our ground in the front, and it's a 2-to-1-to-1. So that means I'm using twice as much of the green to a quarter and a quarter of mango and pumpkin. It's pretty easy to do, and most of them are 1-to-1, so this is just to demonstrate what that looks like. To create your blends, we have a recipe guide in the PDF or the kit, whichever you get, or you can just wing it all on your own. If you make your blends in advance, you'll find it very helpful that you just have this beautiful color palette to pull from. We have all of our blends prepared and we're ready to get started. So if you want to catch up with us, create your blends, or just wing it as you go, we're going to jump right into this picture. It's time to start needle felting this little fall landscape. As with most landscapes, we're going to work our way from back to front, sort of. In this case, we are starting with the sky. We're just going to patch in a little bit of blue in a couple of spots. Use the picture as a reference or make up your own pattern as you go. Tack that down with your felting needle and then layer some cotton white over the top. Avoid reaching for something too bright white. This is a fall semi-cloudy sky, so patch it in, don't overthink it, but do let some of those clouds go into where the trees will be so we get a nice layering effect. While it might seem we move on to the trees, we're going to move on to our barn. The roof is very easy to fill in. We're using our charcoal gray. Pull off less than you need because we don't want it to get too big. It's actually a small area. And you'll notice that this fiber guides easily with your felting needle to create a beautiful straight line across the top and down the edges of the roof. Leave a little bare area where the tree is going to be overlapping the roof because we're going to fill that in very nice and solid. And then we're going to layer just a tiny bit of cotton white or even a blend of gray and cotton white to create a little highlight on the top of the roof. On the right side, you'll notice a strong gray line down that angle. Make it thin or thick as you like, but leave some room for the detail we're going to be adding in a moment. With our roof all filled in, it's time to start adding detail to our barn. The face of the barn is the pure cotton white. Start at the top and work your way down the face. I like to tear the fiber open and needle felt it around the hayloft opening and the barn door opening. So just do the face of the barn in white, cotton white, needle felt that nice and flat. Then we're going to use a blend on the side of the barn. This is our cotton white and charcoal, and you'll see that that blend is like a 3-to-2. That adds a nice shadow to the side of the barn. So fill those two areas in with just those colors. Once the face and the side of the barn are filled in, it's time to add some detail lines. The first thing we're going to add are lines along the roof and the sides of the barn. I'm not going to explain it in overkill here, but this is going to add real dimension to your piece, and as you step back from it, make it look a little more realistic. So look at your picture and notice where there are dark lines and white lines along the pitch of the roof, the bottom of the roof, the face, and just the very corners of the barn, and draft out your charcoal gray just as thin as you can to create those lines. For this entire project, we're going to be making lots of straight lines. So to create a straight line, poke the end of a bit of fiber into your fabric, draft it out so that it's as thin as you want, nice and taut, and then tack it along that line. If your fiber doesn't tear as easily as ours, don't be afraid just to cut it off at the end point and then needle felt it down. Underneath the pitch, I'm using that same blend as we used on the side of the barn. A tiny bit dropped right underneath the eaves of the roof will add a nice bit of dimension and shadow. So give that a go. Try not to put too much or too little. Just step back from your piece and make sure you like it. I did go back and add a little line of cotton white right along the face of the roof to make it pop and look a little more clean while still in shadow. Once that's filled in, then we add in the lines. It takes a little bit of time. They don't need to be perfect. They don't all need to be solid, but this is going to be a great practice of just tacking down a little bit of wool, drawing a straight line, and then stopping it. So they don't have to go from left to right 100% in each of these sections. Let them break up, step back, and it's going to look like a nice weathered barn. To fill in the door to the hayloft and the open barn door, I just used the vintage red and chestnut blend. It makes it look dirty enough, ruddy enough, aged enough. Just plop it down, and anywhere you want it a little bit darker, add dark. Anywhere you add a little bit lighter, just add the red or add a highlight. Needle felt those into place, and I'm leaving the inside of the barn empty for now. To fill in our autumn trees, we are starting on the right side. I am using blends 9, 10, 11, 12, and then I brought in blend 1 and caramel. See what you see in your picture, but let me tell you the basic process. We're starting with the darkest colors to the back, so that provides the depth in the tree and the branches all clustered together, and we're going to put tiny bits of all of our other colors right on top. So following the major tree lines, you'll see me adding these really muted, earthy tones in these blends, sometimes the base underneath, and then just putting little dabs on top, either by pulling them off with the use of my felting needle, or sometimes pinching them off and dropping them on top. During this process, I'm not thinking too much. I'm looking at my reference picture and dabbing colors on and layering, dabbing colors on and layering them. The furthest back tree is a little more muted. It's easy sometimes for us to try and get over detailed in what we're doing, but look at your picture or whatever reference trees you're using. Give your tree a base color for the foliage and then start adding detail on top with the blends or solids, or by creating them on the fly, however you want to do it. The trees on the right side of our picture are actually a little less detailed, and I feel like I could come back and revisit this over and over. But what we see is the top of the tree is a lot of muted colors, a lot of layered colors that are earthy, beigey, a little bit of red, and I chose to put a little bit of oranginess on top. To the right of the barn, down the base, it's going to be very dark. You want to give depth there and mystery of stuff you just can't see. You may not want to go darker than your tree trunk, or you might. For me, this is not quite as dark as my tree trunk will be, but you want to fill that in to create depth and dimension in your piece. Now to add additional foliage, I brought in more colors, a little bit of my spicy colors. You'll see in your options, you have solids like chestnut, pumpkin spice, hot orange. Just do whatever you feel in your picture, and try not to worry too much about the detail, because you're looking at trees in a distance. You're just getting the essence of that fall foliage. So pull off little tiny bits as you see, tack them down, step back, and see how you feel about it. Have fun filling in those leaves. Once my leaf foliage starts to get filled in, I like to add the tree trunk and some branches. So start with the tree trunk, tack that in. It can go right up to the edge of your picture. You don't need to see the whole tree in your image, and draft it up into the foliage. create your branches, notice that they're going sideways, but mostly up. We don't need to see all of every branch. So get your lines to flow up through the foliage. And if you can see all the solid branches, we'll go back and fill those in with more leaves on top so that the branches come in and out of view. Continue adding leaves as you see fit, and it's okay to set this side down and come back to it later so that you can give it a fresh set of eyes. Tackling the trees on the left side of the photo is very much like the right, but they are different colors. So we're going to begin filling in with our dark background, and notice I let mine be a little bit patchy. We're going to be layering in a lot of color here. And then I'm filling in the base with some of my spicier colors underneath that will be the background behind the tree trunk and behind the barn. As we approach these trees, let me remind you that up close, you're going to have a lot more scrutiny, so be willing to step back from your photo and leave the room from time to time. This whole thing is going to look better from 4 or 5 feet behind. In our trees, we have a fairly hot tree, lots of reds right behind the barn and sitting on the roof of the barn, sort of overlaying the roof of the barn. I use a lot of blends here that are the number 3 and number 4, which is number 4 is the chestnut and vintage red, so dirtier like we used on the barn doors. And then the hot orange and mandarin is the higher notes, and you can use just the straight vintage red as well. So use these in the layering. And as I approach the trees, I'm just grabbing bits and tufts as I go. The tree that's more to the front, yet still to the side of the barn, we're using more of the spicier tones. So number 5, which is a pumpkin spice and caramel, 6, which is hot orange and pumpkin spice, hot orange and mandarin, mango. Give yourself groupings of these and continue just tufting off little bits. What I noticed in our photo was that lots of lighter leaves where it overlapped the red tree and was closer to the barn. And I tried to tackle that in my image, but I'm not very good at following rules. So you find your way and notice that the more you layer, the more life you can bring to this little tree grouping. And it's going to look like a fun fall image. Pause here for a moment and notice that the tree just looks like a bunch of blobs of color, and that's totally okay. We're going to get our tree trunk and our branches in now, and this is going to bring it to life and help give you guidance where you want to add more detail. So start at the base of that tree trunk, draft it up. Remember not to show too much, just give the viewer the essence of tree. Create a few branches coming off of there. Don't try and show the whole branch. Let's do the Bob Ross style where they just peek in and out of the foliage, and then step back and look where can you add more leaves and color on top to hide those branches and make it look more full and rounded. The higher notes are really going to help to give it dimension on top of all of those dark colors. So play with that. And if you don't like what you put down, you can always pluck it off. But I think more layers are the key here for these needle felted fall trees. There are a couple of spots where I dabbed in a little bit of the sky blue or a little bit of the white to suggest the sparseness in the leaves. I don't think I really nailed it, but I also didn't really care. So if you want to try that, you can, to add a little bit of space between your leaves. But otherwise, I really think this is a process of just finding your way as you go and keeping adding color and little bits until you feel happy. Just keep tacking on that color until the tree feels full and lively to you. After a cup of tea and maybe a snack, if you're happy with your trees, we can move on to the finalization of our little fall landscape. I like to fill in the barn starting with our dark chocolate at the top, and then I'm going to use chestnut at the base, just suggesting that maybe there's something in there or a little bit of light as opposed to just a dark cavern. And I think I blended a little bit of dark chocolate with the chestnut so it wasn't too bright. Fill in that doorway, but leave a little space at the bottom. When we put in our ground layer, we want to suggest that the light from the open area is casting at least a little bit into the barn, and so leave just a little scoop at the base. To create the foreground of our barn scene, we are using blend number 7, and it is intentionally mottled. So there might be some fall leaves on the ground, maybe some branches and dust and dirt. So pile all of that on there and just needle felt to fill in the entire area. Just to create the suggestion of a footpath like our image has, I used a little bit of caramel leading, from the front of the picture into the barn door. I really didn't worry about it too much, but I like that it just broke up that green a little bit in the needle felted version of the picture. Now's the time where you get to add any other detail to the picture you want, or you don't have to add any, but I just kept seeing a big bushel basket of apples off to the right, and that's what we put in our image. I dropped down some caramel and honestly just guide it with my felting needle into shape. No big rules here. I know it's way bigger than a real bushel basket. Needle felt that in, and once you're happy with it, you can go back and add in a little bit of shadow, maybe some lines if it's a wood bin. I trace around the bottom and start to add some detail around the base of the barn with dark chocolate. I really didn't use any black in this photo at all. And maybe even a little highlights with one of your lighter honeysuckle blends. To add the apples into this bin, I used vintage red and then the vintage red chestnut blends and vintage red hot orange blends so that there's a little bit of dimension, depth, and highlights. And all I do is drop a little plunk down, swirl it, poke it, swirl it, poke it. They're not defined at all like they are in the picture, but that doesn't bother me. To add a fence, I'm using pure cotton white. Start by needle felting a small bit to the barn and then just pull the fiber out at the angle matching your photo and needle felt it down as you go. When you get to the edge of your picture, you can just cut it off. I did the top bar, the bottom bar, and then filled in with the middle one. I liked all of those lines, so then I went in and added the posts. Just follow what feels right with the size of your picture or however you're spacing things out. But you will see that the rungs look closer together at the barn and further apart closest to you. After adding in the rails and the posts, I noticed that the grass behind the fence was a little too light, so I created a little bit of shading with my green foreground and a little bit of the charcoal gray and needle felted that in between the rungs. So if you're watching this before getting to the fence, you can darken that area in advance. As a final touch to this fall scene, I really just kept seeing pumpkins laying on the ground in no particular order. So plunk a few bits of your mandarin orange down onto the ground wherever you like them. Poke, swirl, so they're sort of round, but pumpkins aren't perfect. And then you can add in a little bit of shadow and a little bit of highlights and even some stems if you want using your brown or your green. After getting all of my pumpkins into place, I went around and added just a little bit of shadow on the ground, again using the green foreground and a little bit of charcoal as the shadow in those areas. As you're working on this piece, just know that if you were to do it 2, 3, or 4 times, it's going to look a little different each time. So don't over scrutinize, just have fun as you layer in all of your charming bits of detail. And when you're ready, just call it done. When I first began needle felting, we used to always say to peel your picture up frequently. That's because we didn't want the fibers getting embedded into the foam. But if you use a fine needle with the well mat, you don't have to do that anymore, and it's going to make needle felting your picture a lot easier. When we're all done, we peel off the picture, take your time, and then it's ready to frame. What I love about this combination of using the wow mat and the 42 triangle needle is very little of the wool is pushed through the back. Most of it's sitting on the front of the picture. Not only does that make better use of your fiber, but it also makes better use of your needle felting pad. As you might expect, I decided to put mine in a frame. We found this little frame on Amazon, and I think it's just perfect because at least it looks like wood. It says it's wood. And we put ours in without the glass. So it's very casual, very sweet, and just makes a darling little accent piece. Our little fall scene is all done, and I really had a good time making it. Sometimes I was a little intimidated by the leaves of the trees, but I just kept going and layering as we suggest for you as well. And I think you're going to be happy when you're all done. So we're going to find a spot for ours. If you make one, please share it online and make sure to tag us, #LivingFelt. We can't wait to see what you make. If you're ready for a next level 2D needle felting project, we've got you covered. Check out feltingtutorials.com. We already have a great array of 2D and particularly landscape projects for you to work on. So start with those because coming out soon is this new waterfall with Flora bricks. If you're looking for another landscape or 2D project, check out these next videos right here.